Talk Show. Recorded live.
Welcome to the Virtualization Security Podcast number 68. I have to look at that every time. We are actually expanding now. It's not just virtualization security, it's also cloud security. So we're going to expand the title, I think. We'll have to vote on that. Joining us today is Eben Rodriguez, who consults with enterprises to assist them secure and operate their virtual environments. Michael Berman is the CTO of Catbird, and filling in for him today is Malcolm Reiki, who is the Director of Security Engineering at Catbird, the pioneer and industry leader in security and compliance for the virtual environment. The other panelist who normally joins us is Hema Prafuchandra, who's the Chief Security Architect. Well, actually, no longer that. She's the CTO at HITRUST. And hopefully Hema will be joining us later. There's myself, Edward Haletke, a.k.a. TextIWill in the VMware Community Forums and Twitter, and author of the book VMware vSphere and Virtual Infrastructure Security, the Virtual Environment, which is available on Amazon. The podcasts are equalized by Tim Pearson, a contributing author of the same book and owner of Data Century, Inc. Our special guest panelist this week is Phil Cox, who is a Director of Security and Compliance for RightScale. He's a well-known authority in the areas of system integration and security. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you.
And welcome all the rest of the panelists, and those I did not even announce.
Thank you.
So Phil, we just came back from VMworld, several of us, and we're all actually very exhausted. But VMworld announced at VMworld a very interesting entity. It's the Global vCloud Initiative, where they're trying to get business arrangements through 4 different global players, so that a cloud literally is spanning the globe. And that actually kind of fits directly in with the conversation that we had about automating security, because how do you have security move between the clouds? So why don't you start us off with a definition of security automation that you seem comfortable with, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, so when I think of security automation in the cloud, I actually think of kind of 2 separate instances. And given the fact that I'm at RightScale, I tend to think primarily in the kind of IaaS, infrastructure as a service type cloud models, as opposed to a software as a service or platform as a service. So given that, and kind of what RightScale does, I look at automating. One is, we provide a SaaS platform, so we need to automate our security to deliver that platform. And then there's the aspect of customers who utilize, say, an infrastructure as a service. How do you automate security, in that? And based on kind of the experience that I've had over the last 12 years doing a lot of consulting and walking into RightScale, I look at it as the automation starts with a design, which seems maybe a little odd because you really can't automate it. But at some point, you have to sit down and start with a design to say, hey, this is what we want it to look like. And then from that point, we can figure out what the configurations look like, what systems we have, what network controls need to be in place, so on and so forth. And then once we've designed it and figured out what we have to do, right, what we want it to look like, then we can go about utilizing, a technology, say a RightScale or, VMware's, their vCenter, their vShield, using pieces of technology to actually deploy that out to a number of systems. So unlike, like when I was at Lawrence Livermore back in the early 90s, we kind of did, we had a set of Cisco routers that we set up access control lists on, right? We had a very bounded set of places we needed to do security. When we start talking about cloud, and as you mentioned, like VMware, let's span the globe, right? It's not practical to, individually do those or, hire people to do it. So we need to be able to figure out, how do we deploy this automatically? And so, again, back to my premise, is you have to, it starts with a proper design, right? And then identifying the specific things you have to do, and then automating it. Be it with a DevOps, a Chef, a RightScale, VMware's technology, so to speak, choose your poison, going out there and deploying that, globally. So that's kind of my thought about automating security is, you can't do it unless you planned it and designed it correctly to begin with. Then you know what it looks like, and you can say, oh, I can make 100 of these. I can make 20 of these. I can make 2,000.
For you on that.
Hold on.
It seems like you sound like that's a little unusual or something, but to me it seems like it makes perfect sense. So have you seen any kind of differences or different approaches?
So part of the problem is I've only been at RightScale for going on 3 months. So I spent the previous 12 years consulting, right, in lots of different verticals and so on and so forth. And very rarely did I actually see people who started with designs, right, that said, hey, we want to do this and we want this to be able to scale, so it needs to work like that. And, they'd start with kind of trying to, I guess, trying
to solve the problem, right?
Yeah, it was like they forklifted, a Cockcroft, comment, they forklifted something into an environment, and then they try to retrofit security on it. And you can't automate that. That's basically impossible to do, because then you're trying to go back and patch things up. So yeah, it's been my experience that people don't start with good design, especially from a security standpoint. I mean, how many people do you know that actually think about their tiered architectures and the back-end communications that have to happen? Or do most people say, oh, look, I've got my front-end firewall, I'll just block my, access to my database port, from the internet?
You mean besides the people on this call?
What's that?
Besides the people on this call?
Yeah. But most of the time, you crack that little front-end firewall, and then all the ports are open. Nobody's thought about, oh, did we design this? What are the proper, what are the communications? What are the flows? I will say I spent a good bit of time with the PCI on the virtualization SIG as well as the scoping SIG recently. And PCI gets a bad rap for a lot of good reasons. But one of the things that I appreciate about their document and the data security standards is one of them is we want to see your flows, right? They basically say you need to think about your architecture, right? You can't just, oh, we've got a firewall that's good. It's like, no, document your flows. Know what goes where. They're almost forcing somebody to understand, what their applications do, which, like I said, it's been my experience that the majority of people do not take the time to understand what their applications do, and they band-aid security, and then when they try to automate it, right, scale it, it doesn't work. So back to, where does it start? It starts with design to me. Design and understanding and kind of, taking that first step.
Well, actually, I think I'm going to go a step further and say that it actually starts with architecture. Architecture is thinking about exactly what you did, where, in my mind, design is plugging in the solutions, for example.
Okay.
Maybe going with a vShield, going with a Zen, something for Zen, something for Hyper-V, where you're actually talking about the products you will use in the design phase, where in the architecture phase, you're talking about the concepts.
Okay, then I would completely agree. It's at the conceptual phase, and again, depending on what you choose to actually implement it with, may depend on who your CEO is, or what business partnerships you have, so on and so forth. So
exactly, and that's why I'm thinking that an architecture is more conceptual. I need this type of device. I need this type of device. Now I need to automate these particular accesses and so forth. Kind of like almost need to do things like port knocking, almost.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like
exactly.
I spend a lot of time helping people understand what I refer to, and it's a good mixture or combination of what Phil has said and what you said, Ed. I call it the information architecture. Unless you can visualize, document what nodes in your network, what nodes in the infrastructure that you're putting into the cloud, unless you know what nodes need to talk to what with what protocols first, you can't have a good automated solution. So looking at those flows, and PCI does give us the benefit of having it be a requirement, allows people to visualize that information architecture and then start the process of understanding what an automated security solution could be.
But it's not just the flows you have to worry about because, yeah, I can look at network flows till I'm blue in the face, but now I have to start thinking about whether virtual and cloud environment more than networking.
It's the data, right?
I have to worry about where my data is going, what it's traveling through. So I actually still have to worry about the hypervisor. I need to worry about storage. I need to worry about memory, compute. I need to worry about all my resources. Not only that, I have to worry about the impact of that security on my entire environment, because if the impact is too great,
people will turn it off.
People will turn it off and they won't use it, and that's exactly right, Mike. So when we start talking about architecture, it's much bigger than we really have. It's almost like, okay, most people are going to take automating security and they're going to take their initial environment and say, okay, now what do I automate in here? How much can I automate, right? And then we're not thinking about, I need to stand up a brand new environment. No one's trying to do that. Well, Greenfield, hopefully is, and they're starting to deal with architecture. But Phil, what's your case of people doing a lot of, I have a new security protocol imposed upon me because of some regulatory compliance, because someone came up with something new that needs to be done, where the C-level has said, I heard about this really cool technology, we got to have it. Like, for example, how many networks today have user access monitoring?
Right. Well, again, I'm in a little bit of a, I don't know whether it's an advantage or a disadvantage coming to RightScale, because a lot of the people that we, our customers, they're new, right? They're new to cloud computing. They're looking at that. So we get to help them in that architecture part, right? In the design part. We get to ask them questions. Have you thought about this? Do you have compliance requirements? A number of our customers are smaller. They're like, no, I don't. Oh, really? Is it PCI? Are you going to be doing these things? So we have the opportunity to kind of help them in that architecture part. But the reality is that a lot of people out there have these existing infrastructures. I will say from the cloud computing standpoint, there just aren't a whole lot of people out there that actually have deployments. You know what I mean? It's not like traditional enterprises where, they've got their...
I think that's correct. I think a lot of companies have deployments. They just don't realize their deployments.
Okay.
Like, for example, how many companies today use Salesforce? How many companies use Google Docs? How many companies use Gmail? How many companies use Zscaler? How many companies have Exchange out on Microsoft's cloud? All of these companies are using the cloud today, and they do not secure their access to those cloud points. So
okay, but let's frame this in. One of the big differences is infrastructure as a service. So if we can confine our talk to infrastructure as a service, I think that's where the design and architecture is needed.
Actually,
if you're
just
outsourcing software and email or Salesforce, those are so easy to do, and security kind of comes baked in as part of that a lot of times. But with infrastructure, that's where the challenges lie. You got firewalls.
I don't think so. Even I think I think those absolutely need to be considered because of that exact thought that it comes baked in when it really not. In reality, it doesn't. It's so easy to access these services from your iPad, your iPhone, your smart device that are unprotected.
You don't own the architecture. Salesforce or Google own the architecture, and there's nothing you can say or do that's going to get them to change it. So it's a matter of clicking some buttons on their thing. Do you want to have password lockout policy or what have you? You can't make a new policy appear on their website. It's either there or it's not.
But you as the enterprise and using these tools have to have a policy associated with these tools. I mean,
you can also wrap before you get to that as well.
Yeah, so this is Phil, and I will say, like I said, most of what I talk about in my mind goes to infrastructure as a service. So I agree completely, Ed, that you need to, or we, right? I mean, we use Salesforce, right? RightScale is a company. We use a lot of SaaS platforms. We have policies governing how we do those. Again, when we talk about automating security, there's not a lot that I can do as the Director of Security and Compliance within RightScale outside of policies and those, we need to utilize this aspect of Gmail or this aspect of Salesforce. There's certain things that I can control. But most of what we end up doing, and most of the, I guess, situations our customers run into is when they're trying to manage systems, right? When they are, they used to have a bunch of Windows boxes or Sun servers in their data center. Now they're getting rid of those and they want instances in the cloud. How do we do vulnerability management on that? How do we do patch management? How do we, restrict it? And that seems to be the biggest question. I think for the most part, when people think of the term automating security, right, be it cloud or virtualization, they are thinking about kind of that infrastructure part, be it right or wrong. I would say you need to address the other stuff, but the hardest part is, I think, is the kind of the infrastructure and doing those type of things because, and I'm not sure who had mentioned it before because I don't know everybody's voice yet. The fact is, with Gmail or with Salesforce, you get what you get.
Well,
right?
That's not necessarily true. You can do certain things to automate policy, and the question then becomes that are those policies, regardless of whether it's infrastructure or cloud, is that infrastructure or that access to whatever we're talking about and how that data moves, how can you apply any type of policy to it? For example, some policies you just don't have a physical component by any stretch of the imagination. But the biggest part of all these policies for compliance ends up being a audit log. And, those big SaaS providers aren't going to give you an audit log very easily.
Yeah, so that's a great example.
With them. So then you end up having to do something else to get that audit log, whether that be ensuring that the accounts are only accessible from inside the enterprise, and if they are, then I can impose and automate a whole bunch of policy about those accesses, maybe using the VMware Horizon App Manager, or as Tim is saying, a wrapping procedure of some sort to allow you to pre-internet cloud encryptions and stuff like that you can actually get something that happens beforehand. Maybe ensure and enforce VPN access from your mobile device so that you are now in the enterprise and the policy does apply.
Yeah.
I got a question for the RightScale guys. I don't know much about RightScale. What types of security services do you offer for
So
what can you automate?
So okay, this is the 30-second plug, right? So
you're allowed.
Yeah. So what RightScale does is we help people basically fire up and run instances. So in the sense of what security the platform provides you. Let's say you're a RightScale customer and you launch an instance, let's say in Amazon or you've got a MyCloud, something like that. Right. What we offer you in the RightScale platform is the ability to assign different roles to different users. So you could have people that could actually launch machines, some that could drop it. You can actually specify that this set of systems can be managed by these people, so on and so forth. So it's really kind of a role-based access control, and then the functionality around instance management, kind of what we're talking about. So kind of permissioning and provisioning of users and what they can do, and then really, our big, sales, what would a business value add is that, you can take that front-end interface, that single pane of glass, and, run one box in Amazon, one in Rackspace, one on your MyCloud sitting in your data center, or Eucalyptus or OpenStack, right? So from a security standpoint, and that's why it really does get down to, I have a little bit different perspective, that we don't manage your instance per se. It's not like, let's say you've got a vulnerable, great example, the latest Apache, denial of service that seemed to get a lot of press, a week or so ago, a couple of weeks ago, right? If we were running Apache in our platform, right, then we would need to have deployed that patch. If we have a customer, even though we're managing their instances per se, or they're using us to manage their instance, they're still the one that's going to update Apache. Now, we provide them some mechanisms to do that, some automated mechanisms. So you're not patching, and it's like, oh, you've got 1,000 of them to patch? Okay, we can do that. Oh, you've got to patch it on not only Amazon but Rackspace and your MyCloud. We can do that as well. So we're kind of more of the, we provide you fishing poles, kind of teach you how to fish, and provide the mechanism by which you can do that. So, but from a purely platform standpoint, we provide that. This is what different people can do. Does that kind of make sense?
Absolutely. So, here's the other question I have for everybody else: is that if you were to say, "Hey, I need security automated," what do you think the customers are really looking for? Now, this is a perfect lead into what something Mike brought up as well. And, coughing's not it. You can't automate coughing or coffee. Sorry. So, even your customers, what are they looking to automate?
Well, in infrastructure service, things like deploying firewalls, deploying load balancers, even if you can do switches as we build out new hypervisors, those types of things. If there were any kind of new types of security solutions that can enforce, that would be great too. I'm thinking maybe things like high trust of the world, but I don't know how that could be automated.
Actually, high trust deployments can be automated very easily.
Yeah,
So basically all those are, so far, even those are all networking. Is there anything outside of networking that is automated?
Well, I'm talking about infrastructure components. So deploying storage, deploying hypervisors, any kind of infrastructure that you typically physically have to go and rack. Now with virtualization, you can do it virtually. So those are the things that we're helping our customers do. Those are the challenges that we're having today.
So you basically control the dials and knobs that they can use for setting security policy.
For deploying security infrastructure.
Okay. So, Malcolm, what are you seeing as your customers from a security perspective? What do they want to automate?
Similar things, but like I said when I started about information architecture, I spend most of my time helping them to understand their application stacks, their tiers, so that those automated security components like firewalls, IDS, and stuff like that can be the most effective. So a lot of them come, a lot like Phil said, they have an infrastructure and then they're trying to bolt something on after. I'm trying to get them to look at it beforehand. And so what I envision is, all of you guys are talking about being able to rapidly deploy what I'm just going to coin a phrase right now, these blocks of functionality that support, IT systems, databases, storage, your load balancers, your front ends, your database back ends, your application servers. I'm looking at all these things as very modelable, meaning that there really aren't that many variations in them, and we can model those in such a way that all the connections are understood, and the connections can become logical based upon objects in the cloud, upon which you can then deploy the security components in an automated way as well.
Tim, you talk to a lot of people when you're doing training. What do they want to automate?
Mainly they want to have something automated for them. They want to basically be assured that what they're putting into the cloud or putting into the virtual environment is secure. and they don't want to have to deal with the headache of going back and auditing it after the fact. And add-on tools like Catbird and HITRUST help them do something like that.
So, Tim, this is Phil. I have a question. When you say that they want to make sure it's secure, what does that mean? Is it that there aren't ports open, that it's updated to the latest patch?
Right. Now, you have to understand, I come from the penetration testing or the hacking environment, so that's kind of what I bring to this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
And from that respect, yes, they are interested in making sure that they are locked down, making sure that only essential ports are open. They're making sure that they have a good audit trail if something does happen, things of that nature.
So are they looking for automatic compliance or auditing, or are they saying audit it once and I'm good to go?
I think they're looking for continuous auditing, continuous compliance, because naturally we all want that. We naturally want to set it and forget it, taking an old Ronco phrase. We don't really mess with it all the time.
In the absence of the pretty well-defined compliance frameworks that we have now, a lot of people are just implementing security in a minimal way. I think that was also brought up earlier in the podcast. So compliance is the driver for, wanting, security and wanting, an effective security solution that's sufficient.
Well, they want a compliant solution, not necessarily a security solution. Let's be right there.
Okay.
Let's just say that right
They
now.
just want to pass an audit.
They just want to...
Exactly. Hold on. So a lot of the compliance has to do with reporting, and if you don't have visibility, you can't have the reporting. So let's take it with the detective controls. Are there detective controls we can implement automatically in a cloud environment that tells us, like Ed was saying, who's logging in, where the data is going?
And how many times have you had to educate those auditors into how a particular product works so they can check that particular checkbox because they don't even understand it?
So we're saying that cloud compliance is a driver for better visibility into the cloud and virtual environments, not necessarily, and the security vendors are benefiting from that better visibility.
I think that's fair.
Yes,
I think that's fair.
They are.
So Ed, as we were talking about this again, I keep thinking back to the, automating security, and as I look at it, kind of from my perspective, and where I look at it is there's this, and kind of dealing with the question I had asked earlier about, what does secure mean? It seems like there's these different levels and kind of different responsibilities. And who has responsibility for it? You think of like the infrastructure, right? That's one thing, RightScale does well. Ports, applications, setting up systems so they look the same and applying patches, et cetera, et cetera. You've got kind of that from the pen test looking thing. Are there services available? Are they vulnerable? What's there? The other aspect that we haven't talked a lot about, and I think automating security at that level for those type of, exposures or risks is very doable today. It just is there. Whether people do it or not.
I feel that it's not. I mean, the reason being is if it was there and easily doable and very doable, that people would be doing it, but they're not.
So did I say easily? I don't think I said easily. But I mean that it's there. It's kind of like firewalls. I remember when we had the firewall at Lawrence Livermore, right? There were people at the it was run by the University of California. There were people there that would have liked to have strung us up. Firewalls were like this nasty word. You just couldn't do it. Nobody knew how to do them. They didn't understand them, right? It was something we did. We had to. It was important, but people didn't like us for it. Then, fast forward a few years, pretty much it's accepted in the industry. People learning how to do it a little bit better. Checkpoint comes out. There's some GUIs, people maybe not. Now, today, your grandma knows what a firewall is, right? It's like, hey, do you have your computer firewall? It's just like nobody asks the question, do you use a firewall? It's assumed. And so I guess down that path of cloud and automating security, I feel like the ability to automate the infrastructure pen test level of things, services, ports, those type of things, it's there. It may not be easy, super easy. I would say RightScale makes it easier, another commercial plug, but it's doable. You can do it with VMware. You can do it with different things. When you jump to the application, see, to me, this is where a lot of it kind of falls apart, right? Because, system, patch, apply it, set it up. When you start talking about the application, right, then you get to the point where it's hard to bolt on, right? If you didn't design it correctly, there's almost no way to automate the security. You didn't do your systems, but doing it at the application layer seems to be a hard part of doing things. So I look at that, and then real quick, then there's the whole kind of compliance. When we talk about automating security, and this is the part I'm kind of actually a little excited about, is if you take like a cloud audit or something like that, trying to be able to automate the ability to kind of, for attestation, for someone to be able to say, hey, do you have this policy? Oh, by the way, it's automated. You can figure that out, which gets to the point of that kind of continual compliance, right? Or anytime I need to, somebody can ask, somebody could look at it. So I'm kind of more excited in this space. I look at infrastructure, think, yeah, it's doable. I look at applications and say, man, this is hard. Lots of architect, lots of design.
I mean, if you do secure coding principles, there's actually 3 ways to modify an application without the application knowing about it. I mean, from a security perspective, one is to wrap it. Mm-hmm. That's been done. That's easy to do. And, well, not necessarily easy, but it's possible to do from a security perspective. So you can add security that doesn't exist today into an app because it's brand new. I mean, not the app, but the security measures. You can modify the underlying libraries that they're using to fix that problem or add in more security so that you are actually doing development, but you're hooking the libraries in such a way that you can add more. Again, it's a form of wrapping, but it's a different way. And the other one is to harden the systems to such an extent that access is only granted to those things that need it. For example, using Linux with SE Linux or some sort of mandatory access control so that you can control what that application is doing. And all those methods that I mentioned can be automated today.
And Ed,
which one you would use.
Compartmentalizing it.
Excuse me?
I'd like to add one more, which is compartmentalization.
Exactly.
Creating some kind of a front end that makes API calls to the back end where the crown jewels are. So if it wasn't developed securely, it can attempt to be developed or attempt to be used more securely, I should say.
Are you talking about like what Palo Alto Networks does with the sort of firewall rules that are dynamically opened up?
No,
something different.
I'm really not familiar with their product. I'm talking more about filtering it using certain types of WAFs, web application firewalls, letting through only the things that are needed. In other words, you're basically providing some kind of defense in depth, and your front-end application to your more hostile, open-ended environment receives the brunt, and if it's popped, well, they really didn't get a whole lot. I always refer to it as kind of the bank robber in the vault theory in my classes, where a bank robber runs into a bank and holds the gun at the teller and says, "Where's your money?" Well, it's in the vault. He goes into the vault and they close the vault door. 6-inch concrete walls. He yells out behind the vault door, "I'm going to shoot." Well, knock yourself out. Not really going to get a whole lot. Not really going to be able to do much. So that's my illustration of compartmentalization.
Even if you're a Unix guy, Chroot's a compartmentalization. Solaris Containers is a compartmentalization. Even virtualization to a certain extent is compartmentalization.
Right, but I will say that everything we're talking about is premised on an architecture or a design that somebody's thought about to be able to do that. I remember, I don't know how many years ago it was, IIS, right? It was running as, admin on Windows. It's like, oh, we want to change this. This is probably IS3 or whatever. You try to go in and lock things down. You try to cheroot these things and all sorts of stuff, so to speak, cheroot, from a Windows standpoint. You try to lock it down, and tons of things break. You have to go through that process to figure out, as I'm implementing these controls, if it wasn't designed that way to begin with, and this has been one of the problems with, front-end firewalls, and the fact that people are like, oh, look, only port 80 and 443 are allowed through. Yeah, but you got a piece of cheese code, right, that smart guys like Litchfield or those, or other people out there are figuring out, hey, you know what, if I throw a UTF encoded bit in this field at this point, and somebody's like, whoa. And then when we talk about like web application firewalls, I think all of this stuff has uses, specific uses, but there are certain places where the protocols that are being used in these applications, right, however they're being used, they're not, I guess they're not conducive, or they don't work well with like an application layer proxy unless you've spent the time to really train that application layout, everything that's good. And then it gets back to, oh, you've architected it. It's not something that just happens. And then once you've taken that time to understand all this and figure out what these things are, then you can automate it. I would agree completely with that. And it seems to me that, again, back to at the infrastructure layer, we're better at that. At the compliance layer of that information, sharing it and stuff, I think, things like Cloud Audit are walking down that path, and I think that's a great deal from a compliance standpoint. It's the application standpoint that still kind of gives me the, I guess the most heartburn from an automated standpoint. Automating security, that one seems to be the hardest for me.
I would agree with you, it is, and I think that all stems from the fact that a lot of developers are not security people and they don't understand secure coding. They don't actually get security reviews of their applications. And things like Cloud Foundry, OpenShift, Azure, Kumo Logic, and a few others out there from a security perspective these past environments are full of holes that most people don't even realize exist. Because the security people they haven't been reviewed yet and haven't been fixed. So people are writing code to these environments that, they need to be, the environments themselves have weaknesses.
And to their actual aid, I said I should run to their aid a little bit. A lot of times when the developers write an environment or write an application, it's to be used on the inside. And that's what I'll go and do an application audit. I'll do a pen test audit, and I'll ask, do you have an application that you use on the inside, and then you thought it was so great that you decided to move it to the outside for your business partners, for your customers perhaps? And if they say yes, I just simply turn to the guy and say, I can get in. Well, you hadn't even seen it. Well, yeah, I can tell you right now, I can get in. Because they did not develop the application using this compartmentalization and other techniques we just talked about.
Yeah.
So I got a follow-up for the right scale guy. You told us what the system does, but now based on what Tim just said, how does it do it? Can you give us a little bit of that, the 30-second speech?
How does frame the question for me one more time.
How do you isolate or compartmentalize different applications in the cloud from different multi-tenant environments?
So
how do you automate those security?
From a purely technical standpoint, right? I'll talk as Phil Cox, the security guy who believes that there are people out there that can, do, hypervisor, hijacking. From that standpoint, if you're running in a purely multi-tenant environment, right, then you can't. It's I believe that it's technically, unless you're on some evaluated system, right, that there is always going to be that possibility. And the one thing we hadn't talked about is we talk about automating security, and it really is about what's your risk tolerance? How secure does it need to be? And if it needs to be Department of Defense secure, that's why Amazon built their whole new GovCloud to say, hey, we got physical boxes, right? That there are, there are air gaps, there are these type of things. So from a standpoint of, how does RightScale ensure that, that your instance, which is running on the same instance, same hypervisor as, what DigiNotar or whatever, right? How do we ensure that somebody doesn't hijack the hypervisor from DigiNotar to you?
Okay.
We don't, right? Because it's typically it's running on a cloud. Now, from an architecture standpoint, what I would say is, hey, if you have to make sure that there is no hypervisor hijacking, it's like, hey, you can get a dedicated server from Amazon. You can use a MyCloud, right? You can utilize certain cloud provider, services that say, hey, you get your own box. And so from that standpoint, if you require it, again, getting back to architecture, if that's something you require, then you should, utilize this type of infrastructure. Great example is the PCI virtualization SIG supplement, that the council came out with. They came up and said, hey, you can. We're not gonna prevent you from running in a multi-tenant environment, but we strongly discourage it, right? In a mixed mode, right? It's like you can.
That also depends on how you define mixed mode, because quite frankly, mixed mode, if you look at IIS, whether it's in a cloud or not.
I guess I was just trying to make the point that at some point you look at it and say, hey, there are risks with these different things, and you need to basically define your risk tolerance for them, and there are technical mechanisms that you can choose to implement them. So again, at RightScale, somebody came to me and said, I have no risk appetite for hypervisor, injection. Then I'd say, okay, what we need to do is we need to look at what clouds, right, you could use that guarantee you specific, machines, that your instances will run on a specific machine.
I'm going to challenge that one, Phil. And the reason being that you have no risk for hypervisor injection, then you have no risk for computing, period. Because I don't care if you're using a hypervisor or not, anybody can inject code into an OS.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying, maybe it's a bad example. I'm not going to argue that the threat
hypervisor injection or hijacking is extremely, extremely difficult to do, and it's only been done once to a Type 1 hypervisor that has been anywhere near successful. And that hole was closed so fast, our heads spun. So, quite frankly, the only one using that particular hypervisor in the cloud right now happens to be, Amazon.
Yep.
So they fixed that so fast, it's not a problem. Is there a possibility of a future one? Absolutely. Is there one right now that works?
Let's use a different example. So I don't want to share, I don't want my VMs or data to be on a shared storage with another customer's VMs or data. I want to audit all of the storage that I use. So how do I do that?
Want a cloud.
So basically in that instance, it's a bad analogy, I guess, I would say, what you're going to do, I don't know of any way that, outside of, actually I don't know any way that Amazon would guarantee that your S3 instance actually runs on one physical box, right, that's there. I don't know. I know the instances there's an ability to do that. So more than likely it'd be like, hey, what we need to do is we need to find a cloud provider that will guarantee that for you, and we can do that, or spin up a, Eucalyptus, OpenStack, MyCloud, private cloud to implement that. And, you could spin those up in a colo center or something like that. So again, it's all kind of about trade-offs that you have to have. And back to the interesting thing, we've talked about all of this, is that we've made certain assumptions when we talk about automating security. It's like we made assumptions that people actually do risk assessments, right? That they've looked and said, what's the impact and what's the likelihood? What you were saying, Ed, is the impact of a hypervisor injection is significant, potentially significant. What's the likelihood? Maybe almost infinitesimal in a sense of, current exploits. It's probably more apt that somebody's going to steal a box out of Amazon, then they're going to be able to come up with a hypervisor hijack, right? And then, so to me, all of these things, the ability to automate security in a cloud, this kind of went cloud as opposed to just virtualization, but in a cloud is all predicated on the fact that you've got good security practices to begin with. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do it. You can't, if you don't know what your data is, if you don't know where it's at, if you don't know how it's processed, if you don't know what the impact of your business is, if you lose this or if it goes away or something like that, there's no way to automate. You can automate some security stuff,
if you don't.
But I argue you're not automating your security, that you need to.
If you don't understand information architecture, then you can't protect it and more or less automate those protections.
Yeah. So what I said in 3 minutes, you said in 3 seconds.
So it started out that way. I concur completely, especially with your opening comments as well. So.
There's one other caveat too. This kind of been a little bit of bug in my craw lately, especially with kind of the Amazon outages and stuff like that. When I've always heard about security, you always talk about confidentiality, integrity, availability, right? The CIA triad, blah 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 blah. Well, it seems to me like when most people are talking about security nowadays and automating and all that, they're really talking about confidentiality and integrity. I didn't hear anybody.
I think they're more automating not confidentiality or integrity. I think they're automating either availability or the ability to look at data as it travels by. It has nothing to do with integrity or confidentiality. They think they're doing it, right?
Yeah, my point. I guess my point or the stance is like the Amazon outages, like when Netflix, right, withstood the one last April, right? It was about kind of an operational, great, you did this. There was no thought that, oh, hey, wait a minute, that really was a good security automation. That was a good security design. Why? Because your availability was still there. I guess I make the point that, or I want to make the point that availability is something that needs to be, it's a security attribute. It's not just an operational thing. It's part of security, and I think a lot of people miss that when they think about security. They're like, oh, I'm going to deploy patches and vulnerability management and so on and so forth. It's like, it's just as important to make sure you architect something so it's fault tolerant. That is part of security.
Absolutely, but that's not necessarily integrity or
more of a comment.
Virtualization has had the biggest impact, I think, in a positive impact on availability.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
No.
But it's had a negative impact, I think, on integrity and confidentiality. Because there's no way right now to guarantee it inside an environment without having overlay networks that do encryption and a few other things, because they've concentrated everything, all the security measures, either on the network to allow me to get my visibility from my IDS, IPS, which isn't necessarily guaranteeing me integrity and confidentiality, or they've concentrated on availability, ignore the rest.
Yeah, I would say it's not. I would say that it's very hard to do. I don't think it's, again, given certain very complex architecture, you can do those things, but it's typically easier to leverage like ISV or something else. For example, again, I'll use a right scale analogy. If somebody was thinking, hey, I've got to come up quickly, right? I need an architecture that I got to do vulnerability management, on my systems, and I need kind of auditability from a security standpoint, and I need, that type of kind of compliance-based view. They could design it in all of their instances. They could put up like a Splunk box. I mean, they could design these things and deploy them. Where a lot of them will choose, like, say, a cloud passage. Hey, we're just going to basically deploy, and that's kind of that overlay. We're going to deploy cloud passage that provides this set of functionality, and that way we can get up quick. Because for the most part, what we've seen, is that people when people are coming to cloud, they want it quick, right? It's like, hey, cloud, how fast can we get there, right? And it's not a slow process. And a lot of those things I think are just, like you said, are very hard to do. Somebody had mentioned earlier, like the whole SIM, security information and event monitoring aspect. I personally don't know of anybody, right, that's got something that I would consider enterprise grade in that space that's really giving you all the stuff you need. I don't know if somebody, from Amazon, jumps into one of their hypervisors, and again, they have a lot of control, so I'm hypothetically picking on them just because they're the biggest. But it's, I don't know if somebody gets there, actually has console on a box, the hypervisor, and starts, grabbing traffic to one of my VMs. I just don't know that. I won't see it. Where that would be different, I don't get the login, the syslog from the hypervisor into my SIM from Amazon. I get it from my instances. So there are those type of things that I've just not seen, that type of, technology and stuff that we had done or could do in traditional enterprises.
Actually, you can, especially on the hypervisors they're using. And the reason being is that, as Mike said, he's not going to talk about this, but...
I will if you want.
Oh, please do, but the SIM is only as good
I've been waiting for a word in edgewise.
It's only good information it gets from its event sources. So, Mike, you take it away from there.
Yeah, if your event source only says network configuration changed on the VM and doesn't tell you from what to what, then your source is pretty crappy, right?
Yep.
So, you can't blame the SIM solution for that because the SIM solution just acts on what it gets from the event source. So not only does the SIM solution have to be really good at correlating all of the event sources so that we see, oh, look, a user password changed, a spike on activity on some other event source tied to, oh, crap, someone's creating new VMs. That sort of thing, that's correlation. And that's really where the SIM really should be very good at. But as far as the event source information it gets, if all it gets is event, something changed, now I have to go scramble to figure out what the hell that is.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly.
And not only
absolutely.
When we start talking about the example you brought up, if someone can log into the console as root or as a user, and that's not being logged, then that's a fault in the way the security is set up to start with, because
that's the fault of the hypervisor vendor.
Not even the hypervisor vendor. That's a fault of Amazon. In this example, would be the fault of Amazon's security.
Well, Amazon may not want you to have the full syslog of their hypervisors. Number one, there's probably thousands of them.
I'm talking about
number two,
the console of the hypervisor, not a VM. If I'm logged into the console of the hypervisor, that better be logged somehow, either using sudo or secure or
right.
shell or whatnot. But it's a bad example.
And what I'm saying is, I, as the user of the VM, don't get access to those logs.
Absolutely not.
And that was kind of my point: is that there are some event sources, some things. Again, taking the Amazon shared responsibility. I have some level of trust in Jeff Barr, in the guys that are running Amazon, that, if somebody logs into, one of their boxes that they're using sudo, that they have their logs there. And, that's their part of, hey, we do it ISO 27001. We have an a SAS 70 Type 2, these type of things that they're trying to attest without, basically giving everybody access to everything. They're trying to attest and say, hey, we've done these. We've taken these, these steps. Much the same way that, let's say, a Zynga trusts right scale, right? At some level, we all trust each other. And think I talked to somebody about this a couple of days ago, in the fact that we've been doing this trust thing for years, right? For some reason, it's like people are like, oh, cloud, my data is not in my data center anymore. I can't secure this. It's like, it's nuts, right? You've never used a colo, you've never used a colo, right? You've never used a shared hosting provider. It's like how many virtual servers run on a Linux box?
But it said cloud. It must be different.
Yeah, well, but that's what I'm saying. It's like stop. It's like, people, use your brain, right? Guess what? Somebody, I think it was Ed or somebody that talked about, hey, you've been using Gmail. It's like you've been using cloud for years, right? It's just now all of a sudden the term comes up and cloud not secure. It's kind of like, oh, I can't do this. So again, getting back to thinking about the Amazon, and I do want to say I talk to the Amazon guys a lot. I trust them, right? We trust them. I'd use them as an example, but I do want to make sure, Phil Cox, RightScale, Director of Security, are not saying, that Amazon's insecure and that they've got admins logging into their hypervisors without knowing it. I don't want to get a knock on my door at 3 a.m. Hey.
So my point that I had put up in the chat about SIM and orchestration is, there's a whole bunch of new capabilities that are availed to us with this virtualization layer. And I don't even want to go to cloud. I want to talk about virtualization, because if you can't secure virtualization, securing cloud's a non-issue. But from the standpoint of orchestration and SIM, it all goes back to trust. So do I give all of my admins access to vCenter, for example? No, I don't. I give a limited subset of admins to access to vCenter. The rest of my junior admins I put through an orchestration tool, which I've vetted all of the workflows. So now I have log information from my orchestration workflow. I have log information from vCenter. The SIM solution should correlate those logs, and anything that doesn't have a correlated event on either side should be a security event. I mean, these are things that you can start to do with a good virtualization environment.
Yes, and that also requires architecture pre-planning.
Absolutely.
For the security, and we need some way to tie all this into ways of gathering information about anomalous events for users that are actually granted the access.
Right.
So now we have to tie into behavioral analysis, which is a whole other podcast.
Oh yeah, that's probably 2 or 3 podcasts.
So we now have a few minutes left. So any last thoughts before we go on? I mean, very good conversation today. So I appreciate everybody. And thank you for joining us. Phil, you're the last one in, so do you have any last thoughts for this?
Again, just from a standpoint of automating security, I would strongly encourage everybody, it starts with architecture, right? That we talked about architecture design. You have to think about it. There are some things that you can leverage in there. There are tools, RightScale obviously happens to be one that you can utilize to do that. There's a whole chef ops code. VMware's got theirs. There are ways to do it, but you have to start with that architecture. And I guess that's my biggest mantra, is that make sure you start with the architecture, think about it there, because then it's going to work in the long run. And then the only other plug I'd throw in is I really think that if you're in the cloud space, looking at the cloud audit, group and what they're putting out for kind of helping attest to compliance throughout, and kind of coming together to say, hey, this is a way to do it. I'd encourage people to get on board with that. I've been a part of it before I came to RightScale, and I really like what's going on with that group. So architecture and cloud audit would be my 2.
Okay, and I actually push cloud audit a lot. So does RightScale have the ability to write the cloud audit namespace?
So that is today, no. But let me say, I'm fairly new with RightScale. I've been a part of cloud audit for year and a half or so. I'm a big proponent of cloud audit. You can put 2 and 2 together.
Okay.
So we can't do it today, and I don't know when it'll be there, but that's certainly on my roadmap because I think it's something that everybody in the industry should be supporting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today, and we'll see everybody in 2 weeks.